Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation come to order. Has unanimous consent that the chairman be able to declare recess at any time during this committee hearing, so ordered. I ask the unanimous consent that members of the subcommittee that are non-members of the subcommittee be permitted to sit and to ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. Remember, if you have a document to insert in the record, be sure to email it to the T&I committee. Now I recognize myself for an opening statement of 5 minutes. Today, we are convened to receive testimony from the Coast Guard on the fiscal year 2024 budget request. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, Admiral Linda Fagan, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and Master Chief Heath B. Jones, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. Commandant, I certainly appreciated the trip to Florida and Point South. Really had a great time. It was good, along with those that came with us and during the district work week. Both our witnesses actually started their tenure here just this last year, so we welcome you both. As we examine the Coast Guard's fiscal year 24 budget request, the Coast Guard continues to be spread thin. At a time when the Coast Guard is seeing an ever-increasing demand for services, I fear the headwinds of recruiting challenges and insufficient budget requests jeopardize the service's ability to meet their mission's needs. While the President's budget includes an increase in operations and support and the procurement of construction and improvements in count, which pays for the new vessels, it is short-sighted when it comes to infrastructure investment. You need to meet the future's missions. We would be funded at less than half the level of Congress authorized last year if we were to enact administration's request. The committee is deeply concerned about what it would mean to the future of the mission and mission capabilities. At the same time, like other armed forces, the Coast Guard is facing recruitment challenges. Those challenges are only expected to get worse in coming years. This year, I think there's expected shortfall is about 4,800 members. I look forward to hearing from you on what you're doing to address those challenges as the Biden administration continues to pursue expansion of offshore energy production of wind energy production off our coast. I want to ensure the Coast Guard is taking a role as the primary federal agency responsible for maritime navigation safety seriously. It's not merely being a rubber stamp for the Department of Interior. Regrettably, it appears that the Coast Guard continues to implement the recommendation of the Atlantic Coast Port Route Study at a glacial pace, even after being directed by Congress to first make these recommendations and then implement those recommendations. I'm sure some of my colleagues will have questions about those efforts and whether we can expect any resolution in the near term. I also remain concerned about the security of our port's infrastructure, especially as it relates to Chinese cranes that are marine terminals and continuous cyber intrusions that threaten our port operations. I look forward to hearing what the Coast Guard is doing to counter those threats from cyber attacks, transnational crime organizations, and bad state actors. Commandant Fagan, I understand that per the Don Young Coast Guard authorization of 2022, the Coast Guard has been given the Department of Transportation 90 days to request a transfer excuse me, of Loran Towers from the Coast Guard. If no request is received, then the Coast Guard can proceed with disposition of the towers. I urge you not to provide DOT with any extension of this 90-day period. Loren ceased operation in 2008. In fact, DOT has had not 90 days to make this decision, but they've had 15 years and 90 days. Long time. Time's not what lacks. Ability to make a decision by DOT is what lacks. On the final note, in 2016, Congress directed the Coast Guard to determine the portion of Track 43 on St. Paul Island, Alaska, that the service needed to be retained in order to carry out its reduced operational role on the island after the 2008 closure of Loren facility on the island. The legislation further directed the service to transfer the remainder of Track 43 to the local Alaska Native Village Corporation on June 13, 2017. Within the statutory timeframe, the Coast Guard submitted to Congress a map of the portion of Track 43 to be retained and the portion which would be transferred. The statutory deadline for the transfer was August 13, 2017, roughly a lot of days ago. The committee has surprised to learn recently that only after asking the service for a status of the transfer had never occurred, and the Coast Guard now intends to amend the boundary of the portion of Track 43 to be transferred. The committee has no objection to amending the boundaries, assuming the amendment meets an operational Coast Guard need. However, by the close of business day, Friday, April 28th, I asked the Coast Guard, please provide committee staff with a briefing on the transfer, including a map showing the amended boundaries of the parcel proposed to be transferred. Can you think that could be accommodated?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. We look forward to accommodating that request.
Thank you. Thank you for your participation today. I look forward to your testimony. I now recognize Ranking Member Carbajal for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Webster, for calling today's hearing on the fiscal year 2024 budget request for the U.S. Coast Guard. But before I provide my remarks, I want to ask for unanimous consent that Ranking Member Larson's written statement be included in the record.
So ordered.
Thank you. Admiral Fagan and Master Chief Jones, thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service. Your leadership is instrumental in supporting Coasties, and you've done an outstanding job leading the service. I'm confident that the Coast Guard has a bright future ahead under your experience guidance. As has been mentioned, the Coast Guard performs many important roles that are critical for maintaining our national and economic security, from ensuring navigable waterways to securing our borders and the safety of life at sea. The Coast Guard's mission set is very diverse. We expect a lot from our Coasties, and this oftentimes requires them to wear multiple hats. For instance, a drug interdiction can quickly turn into a search and rescue mission. While the Coast Guard's responsibilities have expanded, its budget has not. I was pleased that the fiscal year 2024 budget request included a slight increase in the discretionary funding, but more resources are still needed to support the service. I'm pleased that the Coast Guard has been able to replace much of its 40-year-old surface fleet and aircraft. Last Congress, I was proud to support the Don Young Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2022, which authorized substantial funding to address long overdue vessel and equipment replacement, as well as shoreside infrastructure repair. Unfortunately, these levels were not matched in the fiscal year 22 budget. Aside from the new assets and upgraded facilities, there are other ways to improve the lives of service members, both on land and at sea. I've heard from service members across the country about mental health concerns. Their job can take a physical and mental toll, which is only exacerbated by 4,000 service member deficit. We must do more not only to expand mental health services, but also to improve the quality of life for service members, especially those in isolated locations, some of which I have visited. Finally, I'd be remiss if I did not mention the Coast Guard's efforts to address sexual assault and harassment in the commercial maritime industry. I was an original co-sponsor of the Safer Seas Act, and I'm glad to see that the Coast Guard has acted swiftly to implement the important reforms passed last Congress. We have a long way to go, but I believe under Admiral Fagan's leadership, we will bring justice to victims and help protect future mariners from harm. I look forward to today's testimonies and discussions about how Congress can support a robust Coast Guard. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I would now like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so that ordered. As your written testimony has been a part of the record, the committee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Admiral Fagan, you're recognized for 5-minute testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Webster. Thank you. Ranking Member Carbajal, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and thank you for entering my written testimony into the record. On behalf of the entire service, thank you for your continued support of the United States Coast Guard. With the funding provided in 2023 appropriation, we are continuing our largest fleet recapitalization in decades, building vital shore infrastructure and supporting our workforce and their families. The world is changing and the pace of that change is accelerating. Our commitments to defend, protect, and save grow every day, and demand for the service around the globe has never been higher. In these challenges, there's an opportunity, and we must invest in 2024 and beyond to generate sustained readiness, resilience, and capability to build the Coast Guard of the future. The Coast Guard workforce is my highest priority. But like other branches of the armed forces, the Coast Guard is experiencing a workforce shortage. We're struggling to recruit the people we need to hire into our ranks every year. Our recruiting shortfall threatens our readiness, threatens our ability to serve the American people. We must invest not just in workforce recruiting capacity, but in support initiatives to meet mission, healthcare, childcare, and housing. We are a global Coast Guard, and as we continue to invest in the homeland, we also serve to counter strategic competition around the world. The Coast Guard serves as the nation's surface presence in the Arctic and Antarctica, and our fleet of only 2 polar icebreakers does not deliver the high-latitude presence we require as an Arctic nation. The FY 2024 budget requests funding to grow the Coast Guard's icebreaking capacity to enable a shift from episodic presence to year-round presence in the high latitudes. Every Coast Guard mission begins and ends at a shore facility. To generate readiness, retain our workforce, and support our families, we must maintain and modernize our buildings, piers, housing, and other infrastructure. The Coast Guard requires stable, predictable shore infrastructure funding to ensure facilities are ready when new assets arrive and personnel have the space they need to support the recapitalized fleet. Consistent funding is vital for us to recapitalize our many antiquated stations, sectors, training centers, air stations, and housing, some of which were built in the late 1800s. The FY 2024 budget includes funding to build out Base Charleston and to complete construction of future Cutter home ports in Washington and Alaska. My vision of a $20 billion Coast Guard in 2033 includes $400 to $500 million a year to accomplish this infrastructure work. And I'm certain you will not find a better return on investment for the American people than the United States Coast Guard. I ask for your continued support to ensure that the nation's Coast Guard, like every U.S. armed force, has the resources necessary to safeguard the nation. I appreciate the committee's enduring support. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Master Chief Jones. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, and distinguished subcommittee members. It's an honor to appear before you as the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. As I begin, I would like to express my sincere appreciation, alongside Admiral Fagan, and on behalf of our dedicated Coast Guard personnel for your unwavering support. The Coast Guard workforce is the heart and soul of our organization, and their dedication and sacrifice keep our nation safe and secure. Every day, Coast Guard sentinels put their lives on the line to protect our nation's maritime borders, respond to emergencies, and ensure the safety of all marine transportation system users. These highly skilled members execute a broad array of missions which require modern resources to recruit, train, and to retain them. As we discuss the future of the Coast Guard, my primary focus is on our sentinels, specifically the service's ability to attract and retain the talented individuals necessary to effectively carry out the critical missions our nation demands and our nation deserves. The Coast Guard is a relatively small force, and we compete with other branches of the military and federal agencies to attract and retain talented individuals. The Coast Guard's recent recruiting initiatives include opening 10 new recruiting offices, leveraging innovative technology to reach potential recruits, initiating 4 new JROTC programs, and developing the Scout Talent and Refer program to incentivize service members to tell the Coast Guard story. We are applying a comprehensive workforce approach to this effort. The fiscal year 2024 recruiting request will enhance the Coast Guard's recruiting ability while ensuring our members continue to excel at their demanding missions. The Coast Guard is more than a military service. We are a closely bonded community. Our Coast Guard families are paramount. Their altruistic sacrifices and constant support are imperative to achieving our missions. The Coast Guard can continue to retain our members and their families by providing affordable housing, access to quality mental and physical health care, competitive compensation, and modernized infrastructure. These issues are vital to our workforce and vital to their families. I want to express my sincere gratitude to Congress for enacting the Veterans Auto and Education Improvement Act, mandating that states recognize the professional licenses of military members and their spouses from other states, alleviating the burden of relocating every 3 to 4 years. This initiative is a key example of Congress's support of our military and of their families. While I acknowledge that those that join the service are not primarily motivated by financial gain, it is essential to recognize that they may be more likely to leave for a better compensation elsewhere. The FY24 pay raise is a good step in the right direction and is the largest increase since 2002. To ensure that we continue to be an employer of choice, we must continue to invest in the basic pay scale. The birthplace of our enlisted workforce is Training Center Cape May. While we are thankful for the recent support of Congress to recapitalize the first barracks, the current facilities inhibit the ability to continuously train recruits to a significant service standard throughout the year. Therefore, the service needs a modernized training facility to develop the most resilient and fleet-ready sentinels. To this end, the Coast Guard has included a multi-purpose training facility at Cape May as part of our unfunded priorities list in FY24. Rest assured that your Coast Guard remains steadfast in its dedication to attracting and retaining skilled sentinels that are empowered to protect, to defend, and to save. Again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much. And we now turn to questions from the panel. I get to be first, so I'll ask my first question to the Commandant. What are the capability or resource gaps that exist? Which ones are or which one even is the most important to you, and how do you think working with GSS to address those?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remain committed to increasing the capacity and capabilities of the Coast Guard and remain focused around workforce, and again, acknowledge and appreciate the enduring support of the committee. When you look at the FY 2024 budget, President's budget, there's great support for frontline operating capacity in the budget and investment in infrastructure, piers, buildings, IT. The President's budget, 2024 budget, in conjunction with our unfunded priority list request, does a good job capturing the infrastructure and investments needed across the organization, ensuring that Coast Guard members, as we field these state-of-the-art new cutters and aircraft, that Coast Guard members have adequate facilities to return to. Every Coast Guard operation starts and stops at a piece of shore infrastructure, so ensuring that not only are we building the new capacity docks to field those cutters, that we're updating the aging capacity at stations and otherwise so that our Coast Guard men and women can operate from state-of-the-art facilities. Thank you.
Until this past time we were down there in Key West, I didn't realize they also were passenger ships. The cutters, they were saying hauled over 125, 115, something like that, people. So maybe there needs to be some slight modification for that. I don't know. But anyway, how do you? And the budget request includes $98 million for procurement of funding for the Waterways Commerce Cutter program to replace the Coast Guard's aging inland tender fleet, some of which are approaching 80 years old. Do you expect the first WCC to be operational by 2025?
We appreciate the funding and support in the FY24 President's budget. $98 million will provide for 2 waterway commerce cutters with long lead time funding for an additional 2. This begins to help us replace, as you said, those aging cutters. We also have on our UPL an additional $48 million for home port investments that will be needed to field as we field those cutters. We are on contract and look forward to begin building the waterway commerce cutters. They are not a particularly complicated cutter and should begin to come into operation fairly quickly. They are critical to our nation's economic security. The $5.4 trillion of maritime commerce, economic prosperity that the nation enjoys, and the engine for much of that is the internal waterways, the rivers in the countries, in addition to our ports. So getting that waterway commerce cutter built and into operation is a priority, and we appreciate the budget support for that. Thank you.
Commandant, the Port of Los Angeles has stated that they face over 40 million cyber attacks per month. At the same time, Chinese manufactured cranes have the potential to do some sort of surveillance. Not that I know what it would be, but they can gather information on the goods and services being performed at the ports. So do you see an additional resource for cyber, including R&D funds to improve capabilities? Can you talk about that?
The U.S. Coast Guard in our regulatory agency role as we work with the port facilities, ships in our ports, cyber is part of that remit and oversight. We have been on a path of investment as an organization, both in cyber experts. We've recently established a cyber specialty in our enlisted ranks. We have been hiring civilian professionals at the district level who not only understand the maritime transportation industry, but are also experts in cyber as we work alongside our CISA counterparts within DHS to ensure that the nation has the cyber expertise and cybersecurity needed, and we are focused in our role in the maritime realm in that regard. Thank you.
Okay, so my time's gone, so I yield back. Nothing. I recognize you, Mr. Carball.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought you were going to yield the chairmanship, so I got excited there for a minute. Admiral Fagan, June will mark 1 year since you assumed the commandant position. At that time, you vowed to do a thorough review of the Coast Guard's policies in an effort to attract more service members, increase diversity, address mental health, and generally make life better for our coasties. Can you share how that's going and any policy changes that you have made or are working on making?
We have embarked on a substantial review and update of many of our workforce and talent management systems and processes. We currently operate an up and out system, as the other services do, where you take junior people with no experience in at the bottom and progress them through a career to gain experience and professional requirements. We've begun doing things like Agile A School. Recently had a member join the Coast Guard who was a credentialed paramedic. So substantial medical training, licensing credential, that individual came to us, completed boot camp, and when we sent them to our medical training school, we worked to develop a customized program to acknowledge the substantial experience the individual already had and speed them out to the fleet, the members currently serving, the clinic in Station, New York, much sooner than we would have been able to otherwise. There's just one example of increasing flexibility, nimbleness, and recognizing the talent pool that we are drawing into the service as we continue to focus on our recruiting needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Master Chief Jones, issues faced by enlisted coasties are often different from those of officers. I was an enlisted in the Marine Corps. What are the top 3 concerns or issues you hear from enlisted members, and what is the Coast Guard doing to address those issues?
Congressman, routinely, no matter where we travel in the Coast Guard, the top 3 issues that I hear are access or available and access to available and affordable housing, access to mental and physical health care, and then just kind of lumped in on the third is just general overall cost of living, whether it be base pay, whether it be affordable child care, and those type approaches. So we have many things that we're working on when it comes to the housing. Is there some areas where we're smaller, more remote areas where we're, investing in Coast Guard-owned housing? There's areas where we do have the availability of access to DOD-based housing, working in cooperation with access there. And the other areas where it's not available, there's not military housing there, working with DOD to ensure that we have comparable housing allowance rates to afford our members the housing they deserve.
Thank you. Admiral Fagan, with the passage of the Safer Seas Act, the Coast Guard is tasked with implementing several new authorities and requirements for industry. Prompt implementation and enforcement is extremely important. Separately, the Coast Guard has yet to implement the man overboard requirements included in the CVSSA 13 years ago. I know that was before your time, assuming the commandant position. When should we expect to see these regulations, and can you commit to an expeditious implementation of the Safer Seas requirements? I would say 13 years is a long time.
I commit to continuing to work through the regulatory process. I know how challenging regulatory work is. It's important work. We have a role in it. I commit to you to continue to advance that important work. Passenger vessel safety and ship safety is critical, and the Coast Guard absolutely has a role in moving critical issues such as the one you mentioned forward.
Is there any way to expedite that a little bit, to see the end of the tunnel?
So I'll ask my staff to come back and give you a more realistic timeline on when we could expect to see that come to a closure, but agree, we've been at it for some time, and we need to continue to move that regulatory project forward.
Great, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Babin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Admiral, and Mr. Jones, thank you so much for being here, Master Chief. From protecting our ports and waterways to assisting our communities during hurricanes, the Coast Guard is a well-known, vital component of my district in southeast Texas and the Gulf Coast. I proudly represent both Coast Guard Sector Houston Galveston and Air Station Houston, each housed at Ellington Field in southeast Houston. Admiral Fagan, my first few questions are for you. If we can't get through everything, I hope you don't mind that I'll have them submitted. As the Coast Guard looks to transition to an MH-60 rotary wing fleet, I understand that the Coast Guard is slowly phasing out many of its aging MH-65s with the intention of reducing its overall rotary wing fleet from 146 to 126 aircraft. Air Station Houston currently hosts 3 MH-65 Dolphin helicopters. I understand the current plan is to phase these 3 helicopters out and replace them with just 2 MH-60s. And while I recognize that the MH-60 is a very capable platform compared with the MH-65, I have concerns that reducing the number of airframes in service may impact the Coast Guard's operational capabilities. Presumably, with fewer aircraft at an air station, it would be more challenging to respond to multiple search and rescue missions, drug interdictions, or patrols, given that a single helicopter can only be in one place at one time. And I don't anticipate drug runners will be idling their boats while they wait for the helicopters to arrive. We can't ask folks to just tread water while they await assistance. How does the Coast Guard plan to maintain its operational capabilities with less operational assets?
We are in the process of transitioning away from the H-65 fleet of vessels. Fleet of aircraft. They've definitely reached their age limits, and so there's an imperative around moving to a single fleet of H-60 helicopters. These aircraft have far more range and speed than the helicopters that they are replacing. And so continuing to the funding support necessary to field 60s becomes critical, and we appreciate where we are with it. We've got a request in the UPL for $113 million to field additional 60s. Right now, we've indicated a transition to at least 127, but we continue to look at the helicopter fleet we have in place now, what the capabilities are that the new 60s bring into the mix, and then understand that we do have an obligation to continue to meet response times, search and rescue requirements to the American public. This is life-saving work, and we are committed to meeting those requirements. We continue to work towards identifying what that right number and mix looks like.
Okay, in a report shared with the committee last May regarding the Coast Guard's interdiction of illicit drugs in transit zones, the report shares that the Coast Guard was able to intercept about 10% of the cocaine flow coming into the United States. In the report, the Coast Guard notes that the level of effort toward this mission is assessed as adequate, given the boundary conditions of balancing the execution of other statutory missions and workforce material readiness. And I assume the Coast Guard is not satisfied with 10% interdiction rate. My takeaway from that is that you have too few resources to adequately carry out your growing mission set. What are some of the factors that would improve the Coast Guard's ability to carry out its drug interdiction mission? And would you acknowledge that additional surface assets could help the Coast Guard improve its mission effectiveness? And if so, why does the President's budget not include resources for additional FRCs?
The counter-narcotics mission that the Coast Guard conducts on behalf of the nation requires a force package of mission asset types: ship, over-the-horizon pursuit boat, helicopter with airborne use of force capacity. Fielding new assets that are more reliable and don't experience the unplanned maintenance periods that the current aging fleet of helicopters and ships are experiencing is a priority for the service. So the ships and equipment we have out on Vector are more reliable. We continue to partner with other international partners and engagement to ensure that we're meeting that mission demand. The FRCs have been an incredibly helpful platform as we meet our counter-narcotics mission.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have 2 rounds today, is that right? 2 rounds of questions? Okay, no, because I've got some for the Master Chief, too. Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Garamundi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations, this being your first, not your first hearing, but your first one on your readiness and the state of the Coast Guard. When we were chatting a couple of months ago, we covered a whole series of issues. In my previous tenure on this, I got to be known as somebody that was concerned about icebreakers. Could you bring me up to date on the status of the heavy icebreaker that presumably is being built?
We are on budget, on contract for Polar Security Cutter. The 24 budget includes $170 million, which will be long lead time material for a 3rd Polar Security Cutter. The yard that we contracted with was recently purchased. It's now Bollinger, Mississippi. We continue to work closely with the yard to get to the correct level of maturity on detailed design.
You're being, excuse me for interrupting. Tell me exactly what's happening. Put the happy talk aside. This is not going well.
We
The
are,
original contractor went belly up, you got a new contractor in, there's all kinds of design problems. Lay it out here so that we can participate in solving the problem.
I am confident in the design and I'm confident in the yard. We've got work to do to mature that design. We have not built an icebreaker in this nation since the mid-'70s. This is an incredibly complex ship to build. The steel thicknesses, the scantlings will take effort to ensure that the design's at the right level of maturity. If we begin constructing before there's an appropriate level of design, that will continue to delay reaching full operating capacity with the vessel downstream. We are engaged with that yard and in the planning process through the integrated planning office with the Navy. This is a weekly conversation. Everyone understands the sense of urgency. This is a critical national security need for the country. We need icebreaking capacity as a nation in the Arctic. We're an Arctic nation. We need that icebreaking capacity in the Arctic, and we're committed to working with the yard, 100% confident in the design as we begin to build it, that it will be the capability that the nation needs.
So when will the design be completed?
I continue to work. I don't have I would give you a date if I had one. I don't have a definitive date from my team. I'm hopeful we will have one soon. As soon as we have that, I will share it with the committee. And once we've got that level of design maturity, we will begin to put estimates around what the actual.
So we don't know when the design is going to be completed. Do you have some idea in which decade it might actually be built?
The design will be completed soon, I am optimistic. Once we begin to build the ship, it is a complex ship and will take a number of years to build.
So which decade?
I do not want to put a date out there without, once we have the detailed design, it will be several years, 3+ to begin, but get to completion on that ship.
So what is your interim plan?
We have money, if it's appropriated in the president's budget, for $125 million for a commercially available icebreaker. If it's appropriated, we're excited about what that capability brings to the nation. We would operate that icebreaker. And look forward to working with the committee for bringing that.
So you've identified an icebreaker that's out there for sale?
There is a icebreaker available should we receive an appropriation that we will continue to work to see what is required to acquire that.
We've been at this a long time in this committee, and the inability of the Coast Guard to get this even started is a major national security problem. And frankly, your answers are not satisfactory. I would hope that this committee would be given specific detail. You didn't tell us where that ship is. Have you looked at renting, leasing long-term icebreakers?
So there is one U.S.-constructed commercially available icebreaker. We've worked with the committee for language to ease the acquisition of that icebreaker. When we have considered leasing of other icebreakers, it does not create either greater speed or reduced costs. And so work with an appropriation, working to acquire a commercially available icebreaker is the most sort of cost and time expeditious way forward for the nation.
How many icebreakers do we need?
I recently signed out a fleet mix analysis that indicates we need 8 to 9 icebreakers.
And you have one under construction, the design of which is not yet complete. You're talking about purchasing another icebreaker from, and we happen to know the company, so no secrets around here. Do you have any idea what it will take to make that purchased icebreaker useful for the Coast Guard?
The budget reflects $25 million to bring that vessel into initial operating capacity. We continue to work to estimate what out-year cost will be to support.
So the need is somewhat near 10 icebreakers.
So we have Polar Security Contract, commercially available icebreaker, Healy, which is the medium icebreaker currently in operation, and Polar Star, which is our heavy icebreaker. Those two are in full operation now.
Thank you.
Mr. Mask.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, Master Chief, for being here today. Look forward to asking you all a few questions. And I want to get into the idea of equitable to begin with. And so, Admiral, I would just start with a question in this way. As you're onboarding new coasties, would you say that it would be equitable if the goal was 3 males for every 1 female? Would you say that would be equitable for onboarding?
I'm onboarding talent. I'm onboarding the best talent that I can hire. I would like that talent to be diverse, but I am hiring talent that meets the requirements to serve the nation. There are
Commend you
not-
for it. Best man, best woman for the job.
best-
Absolutely.
Best individual for the job, absolutely.
But in terms of goal for number,
There is no goal for number. I want the best talent, the most diverse talent that I can field. I have a number that
Okay,
I
I'm
need to
gonna-
meet for my
I'm
readiness.
going to ask this slightly differently then, because my goal really isn't talking about the equity of your force right now. It's about the equity of this bridge and this waterway that you're looking at here. I'll start with my colleagues then. Let me ask my colleagues. If I got 5 minutes and you all got 2 minutes, would that be equitable? Mr. Garamendi? But would me getting 5 minutes and you getting 2 minutes, would that be equitable for our time frame on this committee?
As long as you're asking the question, I'm willing to give you as much as possible.
You're willing to give me more time, make it more equitable for me. I appreciate it. Thanks for working with equity for me. Chairman, you care to weigh in? Would half of us getting 5 minutes and others getting 3 minutes, would that be equitable for time usage?
I don't think you have enough variables.
I don't know what that means.
I don't know what yours mean.
Mr. Babin, you chimed in.
It wouldn't be equitable.
No.
Somebody would squawk.
They would. This is Washington, D.C., and we have a habit of not being common sense here. Equitable is 50-50. Would you agree?
In the context that we're talking,
What are we talking about, ma'am?
so I'm committed to a full and transparent process. I'm committed to ensuring that the equities of the users are considered as we work to create opportunity for both user groups.
Ma'am, equity is 50-50. And what we're looking at with this railroad bridge and this waterway is that you have a train company, for-profit train company, looking to run 32 trains a day over that bridge. And it takes a minimum of 18 minutes just to get that bridge to go from open, where boats can go through, to closed, to back open again, when boats can go through again. And if you do the math on that, and they're looking to do that over a 15-hour window of the day, then what they're doing is they're closing off the waterway 9.5 hours of the day, 9.5 hours out of 15 hours. Is that equitable to the community whose resource that is?
We are in a rulemaking process with regard to the permitting on this bridge.
But is it equitable, ma'am, that a community gets 5 hours out of 10 hours? Is that equitable?
The waterway users.
Ma'am, let's be common sense here. Don't filibuster my time, and let's be common sense. Is it equitable that the community that lives in and around this waterway, this very busy waterway, get 5 hours out of 15 hours? Is that equitable?
The waterway users are entitled to their access to navigation.
Yes.
The bridge user is entitled to their access to the bridge. How that schedule is created will matter. The waterway users may have higher demand during certain periods of the day, and
But I'll mention right now, you're not doing a study to determine that. You did a waterway access management study back in 2017, which you all have chosen to ignore. I'll throw that in right now. I'm very glad that we're doing a second round because we are going to talk more about this. But would it be equitable? Maybe we can answer this. Let's do it a little bit more on the numbers. If the community got 1 hour of time and the trains got 14 hours of time, would that be considered to you non-equitable? Can we at least say that 1 versus 14 is non-equitable?
we are committed to a fully transparent process.
That's not an answer to my question, ma'am. Can you at least agree that
Facts.
the community only getting 1 hour out of a 15-minute hour time frame would not be equitable for that community. You can't agree to that?
I want to understand the use pattern and data so that we can create a dynamic schedule that allows both user groups the access they need.
Would that include doing a waterway access management study?
The test deviation will create that data for us. We will simultaneously, it'll be a 6-month time period. We'll understand how many of the recreational users and what the train schedule is, and it'll work to incorporate
So,
that.
Mr. Chairman, just to be clear here, I would ask your assistance in getting an answer. Would 1 hour out of 15 be considered not equitable? Can we at least agree on that? That's not equitable. 1 out of 15 is not equitable. Can you help me get an answer, Mr. Chairman?
No,
No?
no.
I'm not surprised. Well, I'm happy to keep going. I'm enjoying it. How about 2 hours? Would 2?
Okay, time's expired.
Oh, okay, all right. You didn't say that before.
Mr. Auchincloch.
Thank you, Chairman. Admiral, welcome. Foreign Policy recently published an article entitled, "The U.S. Coast Guard is Helping Southeast Asians Protect Their Seas," which states that the economic activities of all of Southeast Asia's waters are claimed as coastal state jurisdictions. There is little the Coast Guard can do to provide direct enforcement activities, and its maritime security activities are pretty much limited to capacity building and diplomatic actions. We have seen elsewhere that the Coast Guard's assistance with maritime surveillance and law enforcement in the Indo-Pacific has solidified partnerships with nations in the region as the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA look to militarize the South China Sea and otherwise interdict eastbound trans-Pacific shipments. How can the Coast Guard work with Southeast Asian allies or non-allied nations to increase your presence and the utility of your ships there?
Thank you. We work closely with a number of key partners and allies throughout the Indo-Pacific and Oceania. One of the great benefits of the Coast Guard is our people-to-people engagement beyond, and I'll talk to the large ships here in a minute. Mobile and maritime training teams sent to a nation to help them, whether it's small engine repair, learning how to repair small engines, conduct fisheries operations in their own exclusive economic zone, or shipwriter agreements where we take an individual from that nation. Recently, Fiji would be an example. We have a bilateral shipwriter agreement with Fiji. Our ship in the area, a Fijian shipwriter who brings their authority and expertise. And so there are a number of key engagements we do in the region. We have asked for, in the UPL, there's an ask for 4 additional FRCs that would increase
FRCs?
fast response cutters, more persistent presence into the Indo-Pacific theater as a signal of where investment opportunities might be with regard to the Coast Guard as we counter those threats.
Good. Well, as someone who once commanded a military-to-military training mission, I can attest that those could have huge leverage in the host country's forces and training, and they can be highly effective. What are you hearing from your sentinels overseas about the reception that the Coast Guard is getting in these activities?
The reception the Coast Guard gets is really exceptional. There is a far greater demand for those kinds of services than we've got capacity to provide. And it's not just true in the Pacific. Off the coast of Africa, our European partners and nation, this is one of the value propositions of the Coast Guard, are those kinds of engagements and that kind of partnership building.
And are you working with, or do you have a conception of how you fit into the Marine Corps' Force Redesign 2030 for their first island chain stand-in forces?
So we are part of the Maritime Force. Tri-Maritime Strategy was jointly signed out by my predecessor and the other service chiefs. We are committed to being part of the maritime arm of the U.S. government.
And you support Force Redesign 2030?
I'm going to talk to it from the Coast Guard's perspective, which is our contribution is in that partnership capacity building. The work we do in the competitive space, short of a conflict, we field ships that are operationally ready and at the same level of readiness level as the Navy, particularly as we operate in the Pacific.
final question for you, also related to the Indo-Pacific, slightly different, though, if I understand correctly, Admiral, earlier in your career, you helped put together the International Ship and Port Facility Code. Do you see any ability for that code to be applied or updated to help with ports screening for gray market or other illicit imports of Russian oil in violation of the price cap that has been put into place, particularly Indian ports?
That is an interesting question. It's not one that I've considered. We'll certainly, we'll come back to you on what might be possible with regard to the current ISPS code and that particular problem set.
I'd welcome your thoughts on that. It sounds like you've got a rich history in working on it, so. Final 30 seconds, Master Chief, for you in terms of workforce and recruitment. How much have you explored, given this new generation's maybe skepticism of 30-year-long careers in one organization in helping them envision the skills that they get in just 4 to 5 years of working in the Coast Guard and how that can translate to the private sector? Is that part of the value prop you're trying to put out there?
Yes, sir, thank you for that. And it's something that we talk to is, the same studies would tell you that an older generation valued that 30 years with one company, the value that leads, and that the younger workforce coming in today likes something new and exciting every few years. What I talk to a lot is the fact that don't we as a U.S. Coast Guard offer both. We offer the opportunity to come in and to do something new and exciting every few years, as well as that invested into that 30 to 34-year career.
Yield back, Chairman.
Mr. Izzo.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank everybody for being here today, and I know the Coast Guard plays a vital role in hurricane response and port security. I'm also proud of the work that the shipbuilding industry does to modernize the fleet on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. The Coast Guard continues to be asked to do more than ever. I want to ensure that the 2024 budget addresses the concerns with the security of our maritime borders, the challenges to our national sovereignty in the Arctic, and the growing threats in the Indo-Pacific. Admiral Fagan, infrastructure continues to be an issue within the Coast Guard. Does the Coast Guard have the resources needed to replace aging and inadequate buildings, hangars, and assets?
Thank you. The infrastructure backlog needs of the service are well known. My predecessors have spoken to them. The infrastructure investments reflected in the 24 President's budget, coupled with our 24 UPL, identify the areas of infrastructure greatest need. It totals about $3 billion. The organization, the force needs reliable $400 to $500 million a year growth, 3 to 5% in that infrastructure investment to begin to enable time for planning and then execution in a way that allows investments for the new assets coming online and also updates the backlog of aging and older infrastructure that we are operating some of the force from.
Thank you. Master Chief Jones, another issue that's no secret, we've talked about that a little bit, is the workforce. 2022 GAO study showed that the Coast Guard has a shortage of 400 marine inspectors. This lack of workforce has affected its ability to conduct gas carrier compliance exams. The same report recommended the Coast Guard conduct an assessment of adopting a risk-based approach for conducting these exams. Is the Coast Guard still experiencing a shortage of marine inspectors? And do you believe the Coast Guard compliance program would benefit from applying a risk-based approach for petroleum and gas compliant exams?
Mr. Congressman, across our workforce, in every community we have, we face a workforce shortage. There's no one community that's 100% full, to include marine inspectors, and we are applying a risk-based approach. We're starting to develop, as we apply a risk-based approach, to how we staff and staff our units to perform the multitude of missions.
Very good. So you believe it would be helpful to Congress to make some changes to the law that would allow the establishment and implementation of risk-based program for these inspectors to help address this issue?
I would defer that expertise to somewhere else in the Coast Guard for that answer, sir.
Thank you, sir, for your willingness to testify. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Ranking Member Larson, you're recognized for some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for being late. I was on the floor managing a piece of legislation, so we'll see everyone at 5 o'clock for one vote. Admiral, good to see you again. We've talked a lot up at the Academy, and I don't know that I have a lot of things to repeat on that, but some things have happened since, including a discussion here on Capitol Hill about reverting back to FY22 funding levels, which will have impact on a lot of things in the budget. And I was curious if the Coast Guard has done any analysis of what that would mean if you had an FY22 funding level versus what was proposed in the President's budget.
If we were held at an FY22 funding level, we would start with a $500 million shortfall. With inflation, increased costs, that immediately begins to impact our ability to provide frontline operating services. As we make budget choices and decisions, we prioritize that frontline operating capacity for this service. And so an ability to continue to field the major acquisitions, begin to work through some of the infrastructure backlog, all of that gets put at risk if we're held to a 22 budget level, and frankly, it impacts readiness almost immediately for the service.
Yeah, so, but to say it, put another way, you can't point to a specific thing, but the fact is you just will have that much less, fewer resources to do what we're asking you to do today.
We will be forced to make very difficult trade-offs. The investments, the acquisition investment, these are step functions. You can't phase a little bit of it. It's an all or nothing, and very quickly we will be faced with difficult trade-offs, but we'll work to preserve people, workforce, and frontline operating capacity. But that all gets put into question if we're held at that level.
Yeah, okay, thank you, thanks. And then one of the questions I did ask is, and this impacts Washington State, if I could be parochial even on the ranking member, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. Detrimental to mariners across the country, but certainly my district and the state, is the crewing for the state ferry system and the backlog in mariner credentialing. It's a core responsibility of the Coast Guard, but there wasn't money put in for a necessary upgrade to the system so that these credentialing activities can happen sooner. Can you talk a little bit about what your plan is there?
We take our role credentialing and licensing mariners seriously. It's critical, not just to the operation of the Washington State ferry system, but frankly, it's critical for national security that we have licensed and credentialed mariners. We have signaled some money needs in the UPL. We continue to work forward to invest in a new state-of-the-art IT system, which will bring some efficiency into that licensing and credentialing, and we continue to move forward to be responsive to that need.
Okay. And then finally, I had a great opportunity at the Academy to sit with many of your cadets, including 8, I think, from the great state of Washington, and very much enjoyed it. But what struck me is that the various groups on campus at the Academy, it's a cadet-driven discussions and cadet-driven actions on the need for diversity. It's not coming from the top. It's not coming. I'm sure you're supportive, but these are cadet-driven activities who they all recognize the need for a more diverse workforce, and certainly a more diverse workforce within the Coast Guard. But still, there's probably now that we're catching up to this, it's going to be a couple of years before that diversity is reflected in the leadership. But how do you foresee that diversity that exists clearly at the Academy eventually working its way up into the broader leadership in the U.S. Coast Guard to reflect the face of the United States?
Coast Guard Academy, you saw it when you interacted with the cadets, we're about 45% women in the cadet corps. And part of the reason that matters, one, diverse workforces outperform non-diverse workforces. One of the studies we've done recently reflected that there had been a disparity rate between men and women graduates at the Coast Guard Academy. When we crossed the 25% threshold, that disparity rate in graduation diminished. So now, as an organization, and as I focus on workforce management, talent management, it's in eliminating barriers for those who have joined us to continue to serve. Women, minority males. What's good for women is good for the workforce, and it creates opportunity for anyone that sees themselves serving in the Coast Guard, and I've got a sense of urgency around some of the kind of human relations, talent management work that we've got in front of us to ensure we retain that talent that's at the Academy.
Thank you, and just one more note, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. Please apologize to Cadet King for the grilling I gave him when I inspected his room. If he's recovered, I hope he has. If he hasn't, I apologize. Thank you so much. Yield back.
Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank both of you for being here. It's good to see both of you again, and I just would tell the committee that we have a wonderful relationship in Cape May with the Coast Guard. It is integral and actually weaved into the thread of our society in Cape May County, and people truly do love you down there, and it's good to see you again. And we are a Coast Guard community, which is also a big deal down there, which is a special designation given to certain communities, which we appreciate. So my focus on this first round of questions today will be on our continued investment in the United States Coast Guard Training Center, Cape May, and yes, I'm going to be a little parochial too, and the Coast Guard's new recruitment campaign. My questions are directed both to the Admiral and to the Master Chief. Thank you both for your service to our country, by the way. In 2022, Congress appropriated $60 million to construct new barracks at Training Center Cape May. Can you please provide a status update on the design and on the engineering of the barracks, and when we might expect to break ground on phase 1 of the project?
Yep, thank you. We appreciate the enduring support and all of the support that the community of Cape May gives to us and our recruits as they go through our single session source for our enlisted workforce. And we are working to break ground, hopefully in late 2025, on that first barracks project that we've been appropriated for. The next priority after that is the multi-mission building, and then there will be additional needs. We've done an infrastructure development plan that will help to lay out the way ahead for the investments that we need in Cape May, but we should break ground on that barracks in late 2025.
Great. And everything seems to be going pretty well?
I have not heard otherwise, that everything seems to be on track. It is critical that we provide safe, state-of-the-art environment for our young recruits as they come through that training program there, and we're looking forward to doing that for them.
Thank you. Last year, Congress authorized the second phase of the barracks project for an additional $60 million. In the fiscal year 2024 budget request, the Coast Guard also highlighted the need for an indoor training facility at the training center. Both this committee and I have supported appropriating these projects this fiscal year. Can you please state your case for why these projects are priorities for the Coast Guard and why Congress should move to fund them now?
Cape May is our sole entry point for the enlisted force, and we owe them a safe environment to train and become young Coast Guard members. The need for the multipurpose training facility is really an acknowledgement to it can get very hot in Cape May and it can get very cold in Cape May. And 40% of the year, those weather extremes impact our ability to train. You can still run 1.5 miles indoors in the facility we have, but it is 90 laps around that gym. This is not a state-of-the-art experience for young people that are coming in to the world's best Coast Guard. After the multipurpose building, barracks, so that, again, people have a safe, state-of-the-art place to sleep as they work through their training.
And it is the only training center, correct?
It is our only training.
In the country.
enlisted force, yeah.
In the United States of America.
The Navy
right.
operates a similar facility in the Great Lakes, but this is our sole source.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak on the Coast Guard's new, quote, protect, defend, and save campaign. Can you please describe how this is different from past recruitment efforts, what the changes are?
The Protect, Defend, Save, and the new logo, it's a tertiary logo. There is no intent to change the shield, the anchor and shield, the racing stripe, the iconic.
That was the concern, right?
No, those are primary and secondary symbols that will remain and really speak to the core of our heritage and who we are. The new symbol is targeted to young people, the 18 to 25-year-olds who we are looking to recruit. We did a lot of marketing towards that group of people with that particular symbol. as we have gained support for marketing dollars, advertising dollars, we are going to the young people on gaming websites and other. This is not a large commercial on nighttime TV. That's not where the young people are. And so that symbol and more focused targeting of our advertising dollars and strategic dollars, it is really designed at the workforce we're trying to recruit.
Is there anything you'd like to see in the next authorization to help with recruitment?
We appreciate the support that we've continued to get, and we'll continue to signal where our investment needs are, increasing recruiter capacity, opening recruiting offices, expanding the JROTC program, marketing and reaching young people where they are all things that we've had support on and will likely need additional support, and appreciate what the committee's been doing.
Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Ms. Colton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Fagan, Master Chief Jones, thank you so much for joining us here today. I represent miles of beautiful Lake Michigan shoreline that has an installation of the U.S. Coast Guard in Muskegon and Grand Haven. I recently had a chance to tour the facility. It was great speaking with the members and understanding a little bit more about the challenges that come with serving, including a 50-year-old cutter and dry suits desperately in need of replacing. The issues highlight the need for a robust Coast Guard budget to ensure our Coast Guardsmen and women have what they need to keep people safe. Another issue that Station Grand Haven highlighted was recruitment and retention. While this was before my time in Congress, one thing that I understand had a severe impact on the ability to recruit and retain was the 2019 partial government shutdown. Master Chief Jones, how severely were Coast Guard families, particularly the enlisted members, affected by the 35-day shutdown? I understand the impact was fairly severe, but if you can talk to what it did for morale amongst service members, knowing that they weren't going to be able to support their families, the uncertainty of that month, particularly while the other branches of the military were being paid.
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman, and it had a severe impact on the morale of the workforce. More concerning is the potential mission impact that it has. When our sentinels come to work every day, if they know that things are taken care of at home and they know that their families are safe and secure, they are able to focus on the job at hand and be more mission effective, and it was a tremendous impact. We learned that one thing that will take our workforce to its needs is unknown, and that unknown is what was scary for them.
Do you continue to see it have an impact on recruitment and retention today, particularly around the stability issues?
I don't know if I could draw a parallel to that, to our recruitment today. I think in the immediate aftermath, it may have, but I cannot tell you definitively whether it does today or not.
Yeah. One thing that we know is that stability is so important to the mission all around. Thank you for answering that question. Today, Representative Gonzalez-Colon and I will be reintroducing the Pay Our Coast Guard Parity Act of 2023, previously introduced by former Chair Peter DeFazio during the 2019 shutdown. This bill would ensure that the Coast Guard continues to be paid if other branches of the military are paid in the event of a shutdown. Protecting our nation both at home and on our coasts overseas away from their families is critical. Coast Guard members continue to show up every day for those 35 days despite not knowing if their paycheck would be coming. For 35 days, almost 1,000 families did not receive child care subsidies. Death benefits were not paid to survivors of Coast Guard members who died while on active duty. And leasing for personnel, housing, you mentioned earlier, one of the most critical issues for Coast Guard men and women in government leased housing were not paid. This simply cannot stand, and we're taking action to stop it. Thank you.
Mrs. Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to be here today. And yes, I am proud to be joining Congressman Shelton to introduce that bill. So I'm happy that she brought it down today. I want to say thank you, Admiral Fagan and Master Chief. It's great to see you both. And of course, the men and women who are part of the Coast Guard. And thank you for your service to all our nation. In the case of Puerto Rico, we are no strangers to the Coast Guard important role and mission, and we truly value the relationship with our coasties, Sector San Juan, and all they do to keep us safe. So I want to focus on one of the issues that I'm really concerned, and that's specifically the maritime border security issues, specifically to the waters of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Over the last few years, we've seen an increase in drug and migrant activity around our islands. In fiscal year 2022, the Coast Guard interdicted more than 2,300 migrants in the Mona Passage and the waters near Puerto Rico, a 200% increase when compared to the fiscal year 2021 for the same area. And according to the data Coast Guard shared with my office from fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2020, the known cocaine flow to Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, either coming directly from South America or via Dominican Republic, increased 115% from 51 metric tons to 110 metric tons. We have also seen a rise in violence associated with these events, and in a recent Homeland Security Committee hearing, CBP AMO Executive Director for Operations testified that Puerto Rico is, and I would like to quote him, the most violent maritime threat vector of any location we patrol. And as you are probably aware, last November, a CBP Marine Interdiction agent was shot and killed, and 2 other gravely injured during an interdiction of a drug smuggling vessel off of the western coast of Puerto Rico. Just 2 months later, another gunfight during a vessel interdiction off the coast of Fajardo in the eastern part of the island resulted in the death of 2 drug smugglers. And the reason I bring those issues here is just to highlight the significant threats we face in the Caribbean area from transnational criminal organizations and smugglers operating in the Caribbean, and the need to ensure a robust Coast Guard and federal law enforcement presence in the region. For example, recently, the island has been advocating for the Coast Guard to establish a formal permanent presence on the island western and eastern part of the island through new boat stations or subunits. I think this is something we should look closely. And my question will be today, could you discuss the Coast Guard efforts to tackle transnational threats and smuggling activity in waters in the Caribbean jurisdiction, including whether any consideration has been given to deploy additional assets on the region or establish a formal presence in those areas beyond the current boat station in San Juan?
Thank you. And we are absolutely committed to countering the TCOs and the illegal flows of drugs and migrants. And certainly, as you have highlighted, the flows have changed as with regard to what is coming towards Puerto Rico. When we're working to build a more robust capacity at Base San Juan, which is a key hub for the region, and as we support ships and boats and aircraft. We've got fast response cutters now in Puerto Rico. Those are newer assets, game-changing for us in the vectors that you've talked about, fielding the new 60 helicopters we've talked about earlier, and boats as well. And we look forward to continuing to work with you and our team at D7 to ensure that the Coast Guard assets are appropriately postured for the risk. As risk change, it often it's much more dynamic than we are able, and so we will move ships and boats towards where the increased threat may be. We do that in the Florida Straits now, and we'll continue to do that to ensure that Puerto Rico has the appropriate level of maritime safety and security that the Coast Guard can provide.
Thank you, Admiral. One of the last questions I may have is that according to the most recent annual performance report, the Coast Guard was only able to remove 5.4% of the total known cocaine flow in maritime transit zone. well below the target of 10%, and those numbers are coming down. What is the biggest challenge the Coast Guard is confronting that prevent it from meeting the target drug removal rate? And how the increase of migrant activities may have impacted that resource?
It is a team effort, the counter-narcotics effort. As we move to field the new ship assets that will be more reliable, the new helicopter assets that will be more reliable, will help us stay on station more reliably. Right now, we experience unplanned maintenance days that take us off vector, and we are focused on the life-saving work that we're doing in the maritime migration, particularly in the Florida Straits. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, are you back?
Let's see, Ms. Peltola.
Thank you, Chairman Webster. Good afternoon. It's very good to meet both of you. Thank you for being here. I'm the member representing the state of Alaska, which I don't have to tell you how enormous Alaska is, or all of the good work that you do there, especially with search and rescue, and really just being a national security presence. And I know that that is not really your wheelhouse, but I think your presence is really critical in Alaska with our adversaries being so close, and I understand doing missions in our waters, practice missions in our waters, so I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Master Chief Jones, the FY 2024 budget proposal, and I apologize if this question has already been asked, it includes an increase of 80 positions, 42 full-time positions, and $15.5 million to enhance retention and support of your workforce. And I just was wondering if you could provide some more details on that budget proposal.
Thank you for that question, Congresswoman. Those positions, we're investing in shore-based personnel that support our cutter operations for our maintenance assist teams and our weapons assist teams. We're investing in bolstering our modern training capability to where we, sometimes best training is brick and mortar, sometimes it's delivered in a virtual format. It's delivering the training that the units need on time where they are for the mission they're addressing. We're continuing our efforts to transition to our electronic health record, which is a welcome transition, as well as those funds also fund the Special Trial Council that was directed as per the 2022 NDAA.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if either one of you could answer what the Coast Guard is doing now to ensure mental health of your workforce and how that's reflected in your budget.
We continue to invest in medical capacity to improve access for mental health care. At every unit we visit, at every all-hands, the concern over access to mental health care is raised by our members and by their families. We've signed an MOU with DOD to improve our access to mental health capacity and training for our own medical corpsmen. We have a Coast Guard support system, but we're working to update that contract so that it provides easier access for telehealth and mental screening, particularly around mental health. And we continue to leverage all tools that are available to us and invest in the capacity that's needed to ensure the mental and emotional well-being of our force.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to mention, there's a young man who serves as a AET2 who wanted to remain anonymous, but I just wanted to share some sentiments that he shared with me. He said that under your leadership, there has been an increase in baby leave for both parents for up to 3 months. There's been funds allocated for new child care centers, and you've made it possible for new members with degrees to come into the Coast Guard at a higher rank. And the last sentiment here is that you are truly taking a new approach and changing things for the better. So I really want to commend you and your very professional team and all the good work that you're doing for our nation. Thank you so much. I yield my time back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we have time for a little bit more questions, so I'll ask the first, Master Chief. Like other services, Coast Guard has fallen short. We've been talking about that, of recruiting targets of approximately 4,800 members. what is the major problem you see in enlisted ranks in a deficit of nearly 20% expected by 2025?
Mr. Chairman, the major issue is just that the mission hasn't gone away. The mission is always there, and our sentinels each and every day are dedicated to getting the mission done, and we need more people to help them get that mission done to ease the burden on each individual person.
Can you talk about some of the ways Coast Guard is working to attract qualified personnel, other than the ones that have been mentioned?
Yes, sir. It's investing in, as the Commandant spoke to, it's investing in how we advertise. We're advertising in different ways, going to meeting people where they are for the workforce that we're trying to attract, getting into gaming communities, which is a large portion of the young generation that's out there, attracting them. And what we're really doing internal to the Coast Guard, the workforce, is really and truly a push to simply tell our story. What we have learned is when people learn about the United States Coast Guard, they want to be part of the United States Coast Guard. They see the value we offer. They truly fall in love with our mission. They're passionate about doing it. We just have to do a better job of telling our story. And that's one charge that I've given to our chiefs mess throughout the Coast Guard, and I've given to each and every sentinel every day, is to tell the story. When they're already out in communities. They're involved in their communities. They're doing great things every day in their communities. And I ask them to almost not be quite so humble sometimes, to get out there and tell everybody, here's what I do every single day, and I think that story will help us resonate.
Do you think the deficit in any way affects, or how does it affect the readiness and the ability to perform the mission?
Just with the simple numbers, like I said, we need more. We need more people to help us, but what I will tell you is, and we get to see this everywhere we go, the quality of people we have coming in through Training Center Cape May and the quality of people we have coming through New London are second to none. They are absolutely the best of what our country offers. We just have to double down on efforts to find more of them to come through.
It's good testimony. Okay. Mr. Mast.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Master Chief, you just spoke about telling a story, and I have nothing but love for the Coast Guard men and women in my community, but I'm going to tell you a story about what's been happening with Washington, D.C. Coast Guard and Coast Guard Sector Miami. Just now, ma'am, you committed to an equitable process, but you're unwilling to even acknowledge situations that would be not equitable at all. That literally just happened. Your folks from D.C. came into my office and made some of the most unfounded statements that anybody could make. They said, well, we believe that if we gave your boaters a 15-minute access to that waterway, they could squeeze 75 boats through that waterway in 15 minutes. Truly one of the most unfounded statements and when I told anybody back in my community that statement, every one of them, their response was the exact same. They were using some version of swear words to say, what in the world are they thinking about that? Y'all put forward a questionnaire about management of this waterway in which you asked, is a 15-minute hourly opening schedule sufficient for the community? You didn't ask if 45 minutes would be sufficient for the community. You only asked if 15 minutes would be acceptable to the community. You took the waterway access management study, something that was very substantial, done with a great amount of purpose, and you all said that you want to ignore the recommendations that are in that. That's a part of the story of the Coast Guard in my community right now. I want to try some of these questions again for a moment. Maybe you'll answer them. If the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard is deciding this, decides that they're going to say, Bright Line train, you can close down that waterway for 14 hours of a 15-hour window, and community that lives around there, you can have 1 hour of the 15 hours. Would that be equitable?
I am committed to a full and transparent process. We need to let the data speak to understand how to ensure both users are able.
Ma'am, you're ignoring your own data, are you not? You're ignoring the waterway access management study that y'all did?
The-
Yes or no? Yes or no?
I'm not familiar with that study. I will.
You're familiar with this case, but you're not familiar with the study that you all did on it. Let that tell you about where the process is. You won't look at the study. You knew you were coming in here. You knew that I was going to ask about this. And you're not familiar with the study that you all did? Think about that. And you're telling me that you're going to do a study, but where are you getting the information from? Your folks told us. You're getting your information from the train company. You're not even getting your own information. After your folks told us, no, listen, we're going to ignore this study because we're going to do another study that's more recent. We want more accurate information, but y'all changed your tune. And you said, no, you're not going to do that. You're just going to get the information from the train. Now, I've talked about the 32 trains that the Bright Line is going to run. That, again, it doesn't even count the 15 freight trains that already go over those tracks every single day. So now you're talking about, what, 47 trains a day going over that bridge, largely in a 15-minute window, a 15-hour window of time, taking no less than 18 minutes? I was in the Army, but I can do simple Army math. And I can tell you that only leaves about 30 minutes of access for mariners in that community with those kind of numbers. Is that equitable?
We have a public comment process. I am committed to taking in all of the data, all of the public comments, and
And that was that public comment process where you all put forward skewed questions. And you even acknowledged that they were skewed questions and went back and changed them because you acknowledged that they were skewed. That's not a fair and equitable process. So let's just try it one more time. Can you acknowledge that any situation of time management between the local community that you're looking at up there and the train company would be inequitable? Is there any version that you could say, listen, that would reach the level of not equitable for the community?
I am committed to access for both user groups, and will work with you and our team.
But access is not equitable. Having access is not equal being equitable. Having access, great. You got to come out on the waterway. You got some time there. You got 15 minutes out of an hour to get through there. That's not the same thing as equitable, ma'am. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the time.
Mr. Andrew.
My second round of questions will focus on offshore wind and maritime navigation safety. In 2011, the Coast Guard established the Atlantic Coast Port Access Route Study Work Group. The group was to determine whether the Coast Guard should create navigational fairways to mitigate maritime safety impacts of anticipated offshore energy leases. In 2012, the work group published an interim report stating that they were, quote, developing tools critical to evaluating the navigational safety risk resulting from different scenarios, end quote. Admiral Fagan, do you stand by the Coast Guard's 2012 assessment that the tools and recommendations of the Port Access Route Study are important to mitigating navigational safety risk?
I am committed to a predictable, safe, transparent way forward. Acknowledge the frustration in the length of time it's taken for the rulemaking to come to completion, and we are working to do exactly that. Committed to fulfilling our responsibility to preserve safety of navigation as we work to balance the offshore wind energy leases and safe, transparent operation of the fleet of vessels that also enjoy access offshore, and we are working hard to get the notice of proposed rulemaking over the finish line.
It's not easy. The Coast Guard's modeling concluded in the fall of 2014, but, quote, did not produce a model capable of determining the risk to navigational safety, which you know already, end quote. As of 2014, there was still work to be done in developing a safety plan. In November, this is a timeline, if I go too quick, stop me. In November of 2015, the Bureau of Energy Management, of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM, auctioned 2 lease areas off the coast of New Jersey to offshore wind energy developers. They finalized this lease on February 4th, 2016, and it went into effect on March 1st of that year. It was only on March 14th of that year, of 2016, that the Coast Guard published the final rule for the port access study. Admiral Fagan, did BOEM select a lease area auction, that lease area auction itself, and put that lease area into effect before the U.S. Coast Guard finalized its Atlantic Coast Port Access Route Study Safety recommendations?
So we have an advisory role with BOEM. I'll ask the staff to come out. I don't have the step-by-step, so the process, committed to the process, committed to being responsive and transparent in that process, and I'll ask the staff.
This is, just so you know, I'm not trying to catch you or anybody on this, but that study should have been done before the lease was done to make sure it's appropriate to do what they want to do. Specifically on the timeline, is this timeline accurate based on the dates that I described to you? And what you're telling me is you're going to have to go back and look.
Yeah, I want to make sure I give you a technically accurate answer with regard to the timing.
If BOEM decided to auction, and this is why this is so important, if BOEM decided to auction the New Jersey offshore wind leases before the Coast Guard finalized its recommendations, no criticism of you, but if they did, it's them I'm looking at, then it is impossible that BOEM fully considered safety in their leasing decisions, and that's obvious. If they did this before you were done, how can they do that? And in all honesty, this means that the offshore wind leases off the coast of New Jersey are actually illegal. And there's a real possibility here. Again, nothing on the Coast Guard. I just want to know the dates, and we have checked this out and investigated. The fact will be of little comfort to the projects are constructed. Navigating offshore wind will be difficult and dangerous. Both BOEM and the Coast Guard have determined that the offshore wind projects will, quote, and I'm quoting, both the Coast Guard and BOEM, potentially increase frequency of collision as shipping traffic maneuvers around offshore wind development. And that's a quote from both, end quote. The Coast Guard stated this direct in its Atlantic Coast Port Access Route Study, and it is in there. I've looked at it with my own eyes. Can you confirm the Coast Guard's determination that offshore wind structures present potentially dangerous risks to maritime operators, a conclusion reached in recent Coast Guard port access route studies?
Anytime a fixed structure is put into the sea, it increases the potential for risk with ships at movement. Our role is to continue to ensure access and navigation, safety of navigation. We'll continue to work to advise in that realm.
But it's a challenge. I mean, this is over 3,000 wind turbines, and it is over 2 million acres. I mean, this is a big project that's going to affect us forever. So I'd appreciate if you could get back to me with those specifics. I'll think you find that everything I told you was accurate, which is problematic for this company that went forward before they knew whether it would be safe or not, or what the ramifications would be. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you for your time.
That concludes the hearing for today. Thank you, the witnesses, for appearing. We appreciate that and look forward to talking to you in the future.